Here we are, gathered once again in our Christmas finest, gathered to hear the story of the birth of a baby, the child of Mary, the child of God. The air on Christmas Eve often feels particularly alive, a hum of excitement in the background, as if we are seeing and hearing right through the thin veil the Celts say separates heaven and earth. The notes of our carols hanging in the air, carols of sweetness and light, carols about the serene scene at the manger, a beatific Mary sitting holding the child with a glowing halo on his head, Joseph, the unruffled sentinel, standing by, and a bevy of animals bowing in silence to this holiest of families. Now, don't get me wrong, I love these carols like Silent Night, in which apparently at a birth in a stable, all is calm. That carol was clearly written by a man. Because as a woman who has given birth twice, and as a former nurse midwife who was witness to thousands of births, actual birth is a lot of things, but it is not silent. It is not calm. I cannot think of a single birth that progressed without an expression of pain, fear, or anxiety on the part of the mother, and whimpers or howls of indignation on the part of the baby, who suddenly goes from a place of warmth and peace, where every single need is immediately met, to the cold light of this world. And while I would hope we all experience moments of awe, joy, and peace in life, I know we all have moments, sometimes extended periods, of feeling that cold light. Perhaps especially this year, as our world is in turmoil. Rather than crackling with excitement, the air outside seems to crackle with anxiety and fear. People express a sense of hopelessness as anger and cynicism are more and more part of our public discourse. We are more divided as a nation than we have been at any point in my lifetime. Many of us are facing a first Christmas without a loved one, without a job, with a new and frightening diagnosis, or maybe we are just unable to go home to our loved ones. The climate crisis is clearly upon us. Racism, transphobia, and homophobia are alive and walking around on two legs in broad daylight. Tension between nations is on the rise. The actual birthplace of Jesus is war-torn, with children experience suffering at an incomprehensible level. So far from living in a perfect, serene world, we are living in a very imperfect one that seems to be spinning out of control. And more I find myself praying, I hear others praying for God to fix it, or at least transport us from here to somewhere more holy, more perfect. But taking the really long view, this sense of an imperfect world is woven throughout human history, and it is definitely woven through the biblical stories. It is true that in the very beginning, all was calm and bright and perfect. Through the miracle of the Big Bang and what followed, God created a beautiful planet, complete with everything we need, especially each other. But before you could say, pass the fruit basket, we were off doing our own thing. And the perfect world God created slipped away from us. We found ourselves east of Eden. But remarkably, God did not turn to the angels and say, well, dang, that whole human project didn't work out so well. Let's end it and focus on sloths this time. No, God stayed and stays with us. God kept trying through the guidelines for life given on stone tablets to Moses, through prophet after prophet speaking God's word to help us live full, complete, God-infused lives. And finally, when none of that seemed to work, God took a deep breath, collected the Holy Self, and took the ultimate risk, giving not just tablets or prophets, but God's self. Not as a conquering hero come down to clean things up in one fell swoop or to sweep us off to a more perfect world, but rather as a vulnerable baby, 7 pounds of human flesh completely dependent on someone else. Born in a backwater to a couple of nobodies who toward the end of Mary's pregnancy were forced to travel to be registered by the Roman occupiers. Born to a young first-time mother filled with fear over what would happen, what would it feel like, with Joseph standing by probably wondering what the heck he had gotten into, and a child born not in a home surrounded by birth attendants, but in a cave, surrounded by animals who were likely unimpressed with the whole scene. This is how God chose to enter our world. The God who created all there is, becoming one of us, vulnerable to all the pain, the diseases, the fear of this world, born literally in the middle of a mess. And this is why I often want to really push back on the carols of perfection, the Norman Rockwell nativity scene, because the awesome good news of tonight is that God did not choose perfection, God chose reality. God chose us, you and me, chose to join us in the real world, in a messy, mixed existence. God became flesh, our flesh. The hopes and fears of all the years met in a vulnerable baby and found very much here in our reality. The hope of Christmas is that no matter what our world looks like, no matter what we are experiencing, God is with us. We who are fearful, lonely, anxious, doubting, messy, God is with us. Despite the fact that God had to know there was a high likelihood that we would not be able to cope with perfect, vulnerable love, and that this baby would grow up to suffer and die, executed by the state as a criminal. Despite that, God entered the world once and for all, a meeting of humanity and divinity that infuses this imperfect world with holiness and scatters seeds of subversive love. The divine, eternally present in our midst, in us. On that first Christmas Eve and today, it is God with us, not God up there somewhere who answers our prayers by lifting us out of this messy world, out of our lives, but the God who comes to us in the midst of them, however far from home we are, however less than ideal our circumstances, however much or little our lives reflect the Christmas carols we sing. That is where God is born, in any cradle we offer, on any pile of straw we pat together with our hands. Any of us who have prayed to be transported to God's presence this Christmas will get our wish, only not in the way we likely imagined. because the opening in the veil between worlds opens only one way tonight, from heaven to earth. Because tonight, every night, for all eternity, God is in the midst of this world, in the midst of us, still seeking new flesh in which to be born. Perfect God, seeking a home in our imperfectly wonderful arms and lives. May it be so.